So, welcome to August Town Hall, everybody. We have a great topic led by Bridgepointe Technologies. Scott Kinka, thank you for leading this. Bridgepointe is a tech advisory firm, and they are just going to talk about, building your AI roadmap. And I think for all of us, this is a really big topic. And as we're all looking to the future and what AI is going to mean for all of our industries, this is just a really important topic. And I think that it's like having previewed the slides, I already learned a ton. So I think this is going to be a great discussion. So yeah, thank you, Scott, and take it away. I will stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. And Scott Sanborn, you'll get those shared. Thank you all for joining us today. As Maggie said, my name's Scott Kinka. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Bridgepointe Technologies. We're a nationwide tech advisory and consulting firm with specialties in several disciplines, but I think primarily and most importantly for this conversation, we have a deep bench in comms and collab and customer experience technologies. I'm getting asked to give AI talks all the time, so I recognize the fact that at this juncture you could be anywhere in your journey. Um, Generally speaking, it's a little easier when I'm in a live room with people, but I start with a conversation like, how many of you are here because somebody told you to go buy AI and you don't really know what that means, right? But we're in hype cycle 2.0. Feels like we're doing cloud all over again. Everything's considered AI, even if it's not, frankly, it's a little bit like cloud. Boards of directors are saying we have to go get some of that stuff without even thinking about the practical application, or the governance surrounding it. So that's really the talk today. I'm just getting to know a little bit. And Maggie, thank you for your pre-prep, the way that you all operate. I do quite a lot of these. So I'm going to do my best to not have this. There's a lot of slides, but I'm going to have to, work to try to have this not be about slideware or just kind of get to the point. And then please feel free, use the chat, raise your hand, interrupt me. Like I'm all good for the all in kind of rabble rousing conversation. Happy to do that with you. So we're just going to talk basically about how to get started. I mean, a practical case for AI. We'll talk a little bit about, we're just going to lay some definitions down. I won't dwell. Scott, why don't you kick me forward real quick? Again, Scott, Chief Strategy Officer. Ali Naru is our managing partner who sponsors the CC&G relationship, along with Scott Samborn, who is graciously agreeing to drive the slides for me. Scott's on the video there. He's an enterprise IT strategist for us. If you'll kick me forward one there, Scott, we're going to just go through a little bit on the hype. We sort of addressed it already. We'll lay down some definitions so that we're at least all working with the same kind of language set. Third, we'll talk a little bit about considerations. Everybody wants to run, but nobody wants to consider how far, how fast, or work out for it, right? Something we got to think about as it relates to AI. We'll talk about some of the use cases that we're seeing and how to think about your use cases in your business. And then just at the end, if we have time, and we may not even get there, just offer you a couple of kind of our standard slides around advice for just thinking about your AI roadmap, kind of how to get started, where to prioritize, et cetera. So we'll move kind of briskly through this. You can click me forward one more, Scott, if you wouldn't mind. Um, we have a research partnership with a company called Infotech Resource Group, and they do some great work around the surveying the community, and we love their CIO stuff. Scott, if you just click me, just 3 clicks real quick. These are the top 5 CIO priorities for 2004. Number one was augmenting business value with generative AI. Two was right sizing AI governance, and they go together, right? And then 5 is, and I think potentially not only related to AI, but super important to the folks on this call, exponentially improving customer experience. And it's interesting. Of course there's some security on here. Obviously, people care about innovation, but the reality of it is 3 of the 5 topics generally are largely around AI and live in your area. And it's also interesting, I find, because we work with both customer experience executives and CIOs. And historically, they were sort of siloed. And today they're together and sitting in the C-suite, generally speaking. In our experience, that is an interesting change post-COVID. So obviously, we know where the hype is coming from. I think a lot of the challenge is, Boards of directors are telling CIOs to go get AI. CIOs are telling operators to go figure out what that means. And then we're sort of in this mix of how do we really make this practical? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Click me forward there, Scott, one more time, if you would. Um, and this goes through just in terms of categories. 3 or 4 clicks on here, Scott, you'll see it animate. Artificial intelligence was the #1 category for spending in 24. Robotic process automation was the second largest category, which, by the way, needs to be informed by AI. Click me again, Scott, 2 more. And then you'll see in future spending, you'll see that robotic process automation or intelligent process automation, just 1 more, is part of that as well post 2024. Click me 1 more, Scott. Um, and I mean, I think this really depends on the lens that you're looking at it from, but at least from a self-reported perspective, the 250 CIOs who took this survey basically said that, 50% of them are in the exploratory process. Some are running pilots, most are not all the way in there. Only about 10% have it sort of integrated or core into existing business processes right now. So the opportunity is there. The hype is at an all-time high. Click me again there, Scott, if you would. And I'm sure some of you have seen these, a hype cycle, a Gartner hype cycle, but if you haven't, I'll take 2 seconds to describe it. There's a lot of bullets on here. No reason to explain it, but I'm going to have some fun with it later. Gartner looks at every technology in a hype cycle. There's a trigger. We're past the innovation trigger. And then we get to this, like, I got to go get some. And that's the peak of inflated expectations. That's exactly where we are right now. Right? The next 6 months gets us somewhere in this disillusionment period where we're like, I don't quite know what to do with this thing yet. And eventually we slope out to something that looks like productivity that is probably, 2/3, maybe a half of what that peak of inflated expectations are. And that's what we're doing right now is kind of help customers just figure out where they are and what they want to do. I'm sharing this with you only to make the hype point. We'll share a little bit about the reality of that later, but I'll stop there for a moment. I don't know if there's any questions or anything anybody would like to add in at this point. This is generally where I would say, hey, raise your hand if you're in the I came because my boss said go buy some AI, or if you're in the process of beginning to plan what your thoughts are. Anybody have anything to kind of lump in there or comments on where they are in their journey? Okay. All right, we'll push it forward there, Scott. Just click me on the next one. Let's get some definitions down. I will plow through this. Click me ahead. AI is a branch of computer science that involves building machines capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence. Pretty simple, right? You know the things that are in there: visual perception, speech rec. You're probably using that perhaps in your contact centers, decision making, language translation on your phone. Obviously, we all understand the importance and the transformative opportunity that AI presents. How does it work? Go ahead, Scott. Click me forward here. Just a couple high level technologies that I'm just going to define super quickly because you'll hear them come up in the discussion. The first, which drives most of this, is machine learning. And this is basically where a computer routine is effectively built to enable machines to learn from data and improve performance over time. Really simple. The key to this, and you're going to hear me say multiple times throughout this, is the key to AI is data. It's not designed to fill in the blanks in and of itself. It has to start with something. And that's generally the problem, in particular, that contact centers have in sort of just running and deploying certain technologies like bot technologies. We'll get into that a little bit later. The second thing, which is sort of a subset of that, is called deep learning. And this creates neural networks of machine learning to create sort of complex correlations between the two. So this is where you just think about when you hear deep learning and generative AI, which is the big topic, is a subset of deep learning. Think of this as like there's just multiple machine learning algorithms that are working on their own and they're comparing to each other. And I'm going to give you an example of that. But if you think about like just in this AI alone, you guys are recording this call. There's a machine learning methodology that's doing the transcription. Potentially, there's one that's doing sentiment on pace and audio. There's another model that's got context on what we're saying that's potentially creating notes and doing things along that line. Chris just mentioned conversational AI absolutely sits in deep learning, but leverages I'll send you the Venmo gift a hit afterwards because it's a great segue into natural language processing. That's the type of deep learning methodology, which is an AI that enables machines to understand and generate human language. But when you get the output from a transcription, it's got multiple models because one is a model that's maybe understanding the context of our language, where the other one is just doing the NLP to get us the transcription. So that's really what's changed in recent years. It's not just that we've had little routines that could run and do things for some time. Transcription, as an example, is not new. But having the computing power to chain these together and allow the machines to make correlations across multiple methodologies that are doing one thing has really been the largest net change that has moved us forward in terms of our capability of driving this forward. The last one is really around robotics and automation, which we won't focus on here, but that's another category where these things are sort of being dragged out. Click me forward there, Scott. Um, I just want to set some baselines, and I think this is a good area of to stop from a conversational perspective. I want to set some baselines because people, we think all kinds of things about AI. Um, and there's all kinds of people out there talking about what's going on. I just want to lay some baselines down. The first one is it is artificial. It stands for artificial. It's meant to be artificial, and its goal is not to replace humankind. Right. Um, the second one, and I think this is the most important thing that you'll have to think about as you're thinking about your roadmap, which is it needs data. Right. So, you'll hear us say sort of garbage in, garbage out. We have customers all the time that will come to us and go, I have an idea. I'll get efficiency in my contact center by replacing it with chat bots. And we'll say, awesome. What do we have to inform the chat bots? And they're like, we learn over the shoulder. All right, well, so now we have to think like, what are we going to inform the bots with? Transcriptions, maybe, but are our agents perfect? Like, it really all boils down to what do we have to inform this in proper methodology? And I think you've all probably heard by now of the Air Canada disaster, right? Where a chat bot was out there and it just had transcriptions that it was using to inform it, and it invented a promotion that Air Canada, had to deal with. Well, the AI did what that was related to, and it wasn't the AI's fault. It was a data problem, right? It's a matter of what are you informing it with. The third thing is that your AI needs instruction. You're asking it to do something. We're not asking AI to be Skynet, right? We're saying I need a routine to do a thing, a prompt, an idea. The fourth thing, and I think this is really important, is that it's designed to be referential. So the real power comes in when you say, I have a recording of audio. That's a good one. I have a good data set and I have customer data. It can draw references, but without multiple things to reference, you're kind of just running a routine. And then the last one, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, it's not designed to be self-referential, right? Might it be? Could we get there? Eventually, do we have smart, self-aware machines? Maybe, but that's not ultimately in the design, and it would generally only happen when, with the governors are taken off, and and the chaining of multiple machines ends up basically creating a scenario where it creates a new machine around awareness. I won't get into all that. I just wanted to speak to the idea. Everybody's afraid of AI coming down from the sky. So let me just stop there, at least on these baselines. Are there any questions kind of at this point?
Yeah, I just had a question just to
Yep.
clarify, like self-referential. Do you mean by like that it's not created to then if it like if they are going through transcriptions and it solves a customer issue, like it wouldn't refer to what it did previously? Or like I
No,
guess
what
how
I
is
mean
that
by that
different
is
from
it's
training?
not designed to be aware of itself, basically,
Oh,
right?
okay,
Or
got
be
it.
like I said, unless it was unless you explicitly said, Maggie, like I want this bot to act as a fake
Mhm.
agent with the name of Maggie, then yes, it's not really self-referential. You're just telling it how to describe its interaction with somebody, but it doesn't
Got it. Yeah.
natively have awareness. That's largely the stuff of movies from the 80s and 90s, right? In
Well,
sci-fi.
that's a relief.
Now, right? But I mean, if you want to get, and Patrick, I see your hand, I'll get to you 1 second. One of the questions we always get is like people will send me the YouTube video of like the robot that says like, I think the way to solve humanity's problems is to destroy humanity. Like everybody's seen that video. Well,
Mhm.
what do you think that machine was informed on? The script of every sci-fi movie that we produced in the 80s and 90s. Like we have to think about, did it come to that conclusion on its own, or is it just leveraging the referential data, which in most cases these large language models are the internet, right? Like,
Mhm.
where does that come from? So, Patrick, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I want to know where the link is to that Air Canada deal.
Any numbers. Please re-enter your meeting ID. Um, yeah, we'll look for it. I'm relatively sure it's down, but it's a really, really good example in cautionary tale and leveraging it in contact center. Katie, Maggie, you want to see what Katie has in there? I just saw a comment come through on it.
Yeah, so Kate had a great point that she said a great way to think about AI is that it is intelligence without consciousness. That's why having guidelines around it is so important. And I agree.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
100%, 100%. Yeah, we could spend an entire panel on just the idea of of ultimately becoming self-aware and what that means in the whole nine yards. Really not pertinent to this, but 100%, you're totally right. So click me forward there, Scott, if you would, and I'll pick up the pace here a little bit. There's all kinds of considerations around this. I'm going to dwell a little bit on this later, but we think about job displacement. There's this concern about consciousness. People are like, hey, are we going to apply these to weapons? I think the one we really have to think about is the last one, which is AI generated bias. And I want to describe what that is. So just click me forward there, Scott. Um, the little trick to the first couple very ugly slides I gave you is that they were actually created by AI. I didn't write them. I didn't add anything in them. They chose the icons. They chose the layout. This was the slide 2 slides ago around what is AI. I guess that's what the machine that I asked this, it was Chat GPT, thought it looked like. So it shows the image. But I think importantly, and it's a really small one, but I felt like it was a pertinent one when I was pulling this together. We all learned in middle school that if you're going to write something and define it, you say definition, advantages, disadvantages. That's like, you know, grade level 3 composition. Do you notice how AI defined itself and talked about its importance, but it didn't give anything on what could potentially be a problem on this slide?
So you're saying AI is a politician.
Potentially, right? I mean, and these are the things we don't know and why we have to be careful. And we're going to talk about having a human committee around AI uses later, but it's just a small example of the kind of things that you have to be careful about amplifying biases as we go. If you use the internet to inform, well, the internet's going to be the thing that is the opinion of your AI. So click me forward there, Scott. I'm going to just fly through here. At the end of the day, you can click that, like there's a little animation in there. At the end of the day, what you're really in the business of is selling predictions with AI. I've got a historical model. I receive new data. I compare it against the legacy and I make a prediction. And if I can do that across multiple machines that are predicting different things, I can get to real depth. And I'm going to give you a cool example of that in a minute. But, easy examples here around Netflix and Amazon. What are you more apt to watch based on your history? Go ahead, Scott, click me forward. That's just a simple example. Um, I think I'm going to skip this. Just click me forward real quick. We talked about this already, so I'll stop here for 1 second. Yeah, right here. So you're hearing about generative AI, and this is where the power is of multiple machines attached together. So think of traditional AI as a sequential process to solve something. Take this piece of data, analyze this. Generative AI says take multiples of those and allow them to be cross-referential. So this just gives you an idea of the number of parameters that are able to be managed inside these large language models, even just from 2018. And this is why there's an explosion now. We've gone from 117 million parameters in GPT-1 to trillions in GPT-4. And this is what's unlocking chatbots, email responses. You've all seen Copilot in your Office 365 right now. It's photorealistic art. And I'll give you an example on the next slide. Click me forward there, Scott. And then we'll jump ahead from there. So here's the prompt in GPT-4 with this picture. Imagine you're an expert evaluating car damage. Please evaluate what you've seen. And if you read, I'm not going to read everything on the right, but it talks about what it is. It talks about what's been damaged. It even gets down to the bottom related to how much it could cost. There's in deep learning, there's probably, think about it, 6 or 8 algorithms. There's the graphics, there's the knowledge of what the vehicle looks like, there's the knowledge of the components of a car, there's a cost database around what things generally cost, there's the parts that are in this particular thing. So each one of these were individual machines that have been compiled together into a generative AI response that gives you something at this level of depth. But historical kind of original traditional single machine AI models would have been only able to say, what is this image? It's a car. right? Without a damage database, without a parts database, so that's really where we're seeing the power. There was a question in there, Maggie. Go ahead. I think I saw one pop into the chat.
Yeah, Chris, do you think you could unmute and give a little background about what you're
Oh,
talking about?
sorry. No, I was just throwing thoughts as we're going
No,
through
it's
the
great.
slides.
Please do.
It was not a question. I was just saying for me that, look, AI hasn't in any way, shape, or form got me thinking that it's a silver bullet. Where I've really found a ton of value is streamlining some of the efficiencies that normally take us a lot longer to get out there. Uh, a couple of
No
my
question. Yeah.
a couple of my favorites. One of them I listed on here. I've always been a KCS person. Love KCS, but I was also a UFA guy. Use it, fix it, flag it, add it. So every time an article, a case is created, it should have an article. But sometimes when you're understaffed, you're overloaded, getting somebody to create an article off every case, it just didn't happen. Now we're using Gen AI to do some of that for us. It's not 100%, but it's a lot better, and we're seeing
Yeah.
a lot more adherence. My point there was just it was less of a question, just more of a point.
No, but I think it's a really pertinent point because I'm assuming you're saying it's not 100%. That means that to get article and the source of the article might be, unstructured data that you haven't dug all the way into. Maybe it's coming from other transcriptions of successful calls, what have you. You've created an article. It's not getting you all the way there. And you've
It's
created a policy where a human is checking the work and finishing it before it kind of goes in to be able to be used to inform another public model from there.
Yep, AI created, human verified. Yep.
100%. And that's one of the points a couple of slides from now, but that's a really great point. Click me forward there, Scott, if you would. There's a whole lot of stuff out there, gang. I think everybody's aware of the text options in the top left-hand corner, heavily used in software development, images, audio, all the deep fakes, all that stuff you're seeing in data. And then obviously out here on the contact center side, nearly all the vendors that you're using today in contact center, conversational AI, marketing automation, Salesforce automation, all of whom have models around this today. So it's a big ecosystem. Click me forward there, Scott. What I wanted to just take 2 minutes on is a little bit about considerations, just things to think about. Click the next slide there, Scott. We talk in terms of kind of the risk factors around using AI. We've gotten to some of them already. We've already talked about accuracy. We've already talked about intrinsic bias in the data or potentially intrinsic bias being added by the AI modeling. Hallucinations, I won't get into super depth on, but sometimes the dots just don't connect and then you get a sideways answer from nowhere. I think what's most challenging right now, and the things that people aren't fully contending with are the items on the right, which is, many of the businesses we talk to, I share some data in a couple slides. We probably won't have time to get to it, but most businesses do not yet have a published policy on the organization's employees using or not using public generative AI models like ChatGPT or Copilot. All right. Now, what's the problem? You go, solve my problem, ChatGPT. I'm just going to give you this little bit of customer data, you know, so that I can chunk some information and get back that article that Chris was just talking about. The challenge here is that every time we do that, that data is being used to inform the public model. It won't be explicitly shared with somebody else, this customer, this name, but the privacy issues around that are really, we face this every day with our clients. We're like, we want to use it, but we want to use it on data that I can't use in a public model. So we work with customers every day to stand up private models to do this kind of thing. Thank you, Kate, on the Air Canada story. The second one is the bad guys are using this too, so the good guys have to use it as well. Right. So there's a little bit of an AI war going on in cybersecurity right now. So that, it creates problem there. Here's the really interesting one that there's just not sufficient legal precedent on yet. All of these models are informed from information on the internet. So how do we think about that from an IP or copyright perspective? I mean, this is raging in like song lyrics right now, as an example, right? What is that going to mean? Like, you kind of repeat the same phrases throughout country music. Everybody uses it. Nobody says anything. But if you used AI to generate song lyrics, it would inform itself from a 100-year catalog of country music. So is it copyright? Is it a copyright or IP infringement issue, right? And we're still contending with these kinds of issues. So these are the top level risks. Just click me forward, Scott. I'm going to just move this forward. Click two more. Right here. I think the main thing is just making sure that you have a governance plan. And this is something that we're doing very often. Companies are just coming in, do a half-day workshop and work on just building a stated policy and plan and then getting into how you enforce it. But the main thing is just what it is, do we allow it, making sure that we have education, for our employees around the risks, around what it could mean. So, and we call that, the industry calls that responsible AI. And generally that is based around everything, including, as was just mentioned, sort of fairness, bias detection, and the human element being included in it. So click me forward there, Scott, real quick. Just quickly on real world use cases, I wanted to share this and then we'll open it up for questions in a minute. We talked about generative AI being at that hype cycle. I'm going to give you a funny meme I found on the internet. That's a fake hype cycle. Yeah, next one, Scott. Um, this is about ChatGPT. So here's the hype cycle on ChatGPT. Height of inflated expectations is wow, it can answer all my questions and quickly gets elaborate answers, right? As we're sloping down, wait a minute, it's ultimately a statistical tool used to predict language without any understanding of what that data is, right? All the way down at the bottom, damn it, it's going to give me incorrect answers every once in a while because it's snipping data together, right? And as we start to get real, hey, I got it. It's great when there isn't a precise answer, but I really can't trust it to be perfect. I love the example of the knowledge base articles post, support case. It's a really good example of it. It can't be perfect, but it can get me most of the way there. All right, when we get back to reality, it's going to be I understand how far this tool can take me, and then how am I going to put the human element back in it, or ensure that the human element is at the beginning to get the right data to be the source of the analytical work. All right, but I found this funny. I found this on the internet last night. Really good example of the hype cycle around AI. Click me forward there, Scott. Um, I found this interesting, gang, just given the neighborhood that you're all living in every day. This was from the CIO lens out of that same survey earlier of what they believe the top 5 big bets on AI were going to be in 2024. Customer experience, chatbots being one, revenue intelligence, which can inform what you're doing with those experience chatbots. Number 2, I think personalization and testing probably also fits into the customer experience arena. So there's just a heavy concentration in these areas. And I believe it to be true. And we're seeing that every day. But what's happening in our world is customers are saying to us, hey, I'm being asked to manage costs and do AI. Can I cut agent workloads or change these things or turn things over to bots? And we're having to walk back to the beginning and say, what's my good source of data to inform the bot, right? What's your governance strategy in the business around AI use before we even get there? So we agree to the size of the opportunity, but really want to help our customers get through sort of governance planning and what's the good data set to start from. Click me forward there, Scott, if you would. And there's all kinds of use cases, but I found this interesting from the same set of data around customer experience. I think I put a little circle in there, Scott, if you'll click me one more time. And you're probably using some of these customer experience chatbots. There's the knowledge and insight category that was brought up earlier, and sentiment analysis. I would put the whole kind of call recording, intelligent conversations, sentiment analysis sort of into one category. Just one set of data from one source around where the opportunities are. Go ahead and click it forward, Scott. Just click me forward again. Maybe a few too many slides in here, Maggie. I think the key on all of this, and then we'll stop here, is really just to take a balanced approach. I think you've got a business strategy that's different than go get some AI. What's the business trying to chase right now? I think the AI strategy is one that, may be the same and probably has some, aligned strategy in the middle, but might be different. And then the last one is if you're not thinking about this from a governance perspective, you need to take a step back because there's risk in the business, not just in terms of your, sponsored use of the tools, but your unsponsored use of the tools by the employees in your business. I promise you, if you don't have a policy, that there is shadow IT or shadow AI going on inside the business right now that you would at least need to have some protections on. So I will stop on this slide. I think it's a good one to maybe do that. And I'll pause here for, questions, banter. Scott, if you want, we could even take the slides down at this point and we'll go back to just one last slide on Bridgepointe before we go. But there's a lot of you on here, so got through it quickly. I'm hoping we can open it up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. That was really interesting, and I feel like I have like a really good grasp of like the hype cycle and just like how that, because it's interesting because though as people like understand more about it though, like the reality is that like we're going to have to start adapting it anyway. So even as like you realize, okay, it can't might not work exactly the way I originally thought it would. I just had a quick question about, you had mentioned like that there was that graphic where on the one side there was like bias and on the other side that there was privacy. Especially in like the call center space, like what do you think is like the best way to approach it? So like you're you're helping the bot understand like, I'm not forming this question great, but you're teaching the bot about like your customers without implementing any bias or about like
Yeah.
managing privacy at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of analyzing your data. We've
Mhm.
got a slide on that further on. I think we've done plenty of slide where I think when you're thinking about it in the contact center, it's really a few things. One, you definitely need to have that governance strategy. Like, just what does the business think about AI? What are you allowed to do and not do? Because again, I think, your creative agents might be using it anyway. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, if you don't have a policy, you can sign up for a chat GPT account. It's not expensive, right? You may have it built in Copilot. So just one is policy development, and you need to get that out of the way first. The second one is, if you're trying to functionally use it in the business, is just really think about your data sources, right? Like, AI is not going to fix a lack of process in a particular category inside your business. It could suggest it if you prompted it. But if you just think it's going to listen to what your agents are doing and start to be able to listen to it, just inform to what a lot of people try to do is inform it from call transcripts. But that's intrinsically flawed because you're assuming that the agents are operating at 100% efficiency and correctness in the first place, right? So you
Mhm.
really need to think about that, like, what actually are your processes? It is not hard in terms of how you use AI to exclude data sets, to use data sets in terms of thinking, but to exclude them in terms of output, right? So you could tell the AI agent, like, you can use this customer's history to draw a conclusion on what a most likely next product might be without necessarily disclosing the actual history of product buying. That's all in kind of how you write your prompts. So
Got it.
it's just a matter of thinking about it. I would start from governance. I would move to really thinking about your data sets and what good data sets do you have to inform it. I'd ensure that there's a human element sort of in between the AI, and the end output. Um, yeah, and then just kind of approach it with eyes wide open. And we do, not to jump ahead to that, but we do have a slide in here at the end on sort of workshops that we run on site where we can tackle these individual topics if somebody's looking for help on that. We do. Your question is the question we get most often, I would say.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I see Daniel, you have your hand up. Oh, you're on mute still. Daniel, you're on mute still.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
there you go.
Perfect. Um, so, Scott, first, thank you for just such an insightful presentation here, walking us through where AI is, where it can go. One of the challenges that I'm facing is a board and C-suite executive leadership team that thinks that AI is the silver bullet
Yep.
and is not only thinks it's a silver bullet, but doesn't want to go through the steps you just talked through.
Yeah.
They want to go live tomorrow with a full, in my world, it's onboarding patients.
Okay.
So with a full onboarding experience with as few getting transferred to an agent as possible.
Yep.
I know that's not the best approach, but has Bridgepointe or you have any advice around how to effectively communicate and show the better path?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I think and by the way, you're right where nearly every customer we have is. Like, I kind of gave that anecdote at the beginning that we meet with customers all the time, particularly CX leaders who are like, board of directors is, I mean, we're owned by, Bridgepointe is owned by private equity, right? So I can empathize with what many of you are probably dealing with, right? And they're like, hey, we have a platform-wide edict to go get some AI. right? So that comes down from the platform to the board of directors, from the board of directors to the executives, and the executives are like, what's our AI stance? Let's go. Here's some easy things we can do, right? I think so. One, you're not alone, right? I think two, the biggest one I think is communicating the risks in jumping without governance. Um, you wouldn't go into, you can't take a credit card without governance today, right? You can't, you
Yeah.
know, if you're in pharma, you can't, take patient information on a clinical trial without going through governance. Like, I think that's the main thing that you need to do. Your company has a security governance strategy on the infotech side. So I would just basically say, like, listen, we're all for it, right? Empathy first. I'm with you. I would love to get there too. I have two problems. One is I think we need to bring in IT and we need to have a governance strategy around this because we're at bigger risk of losing data out the back door without having policy in place, then we potentially stand to gain from just turning stuff on to save expenses and to kind of shortcut this process. I think that's probably the main one would be to just sort of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of we have policy and we have governance in 4 or 5 areas. This one requires that, and you probably want to do it. I mean, there was a link provided to the Air Canada story in here. That's a cautionary tale. It's a good one. And thank you. I think it was Kate who put it in here. Like, that's a really good one. Somebody just turned it on to make it easier. And, AI made up some fun. Right now, that said, if you're going to not inform the model on very much, like right now, you could use um, AI tools in IVR, kind of as an IVR construction alternative, right? If you had a limited set on which to inform it, like if it was just like you're talking about onboarding, if it was just a process and you weren't looking to inform it with actual patient data, there's probably not a tremendous amount of risk there. But if you're doing an onboarding and it's reaching into data sets, you know what I mean, that potentially have exposure around patient information or what have you, then you're crossing down and just compare it to that credit card challenge, right? We need governance. Let's at least start there. All for turning it on, but we got to have a policy in place first.
Thank you.
Yep. Any others?
Yeah, Kate, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to jump in also. No need to.
Thanks, Scott. You have so much information. It's awesome. I also work in the AI space with Humosh. We just last month we won the United Healthcare / Optum Innovation Summit, which is a huge big win for us. And
Awesome.
the reason that we won isn't because our tech was better. Our tech is great. It's on par with the other great tech in this space. But what made us different is that we already have that human in the loop, that governance cycle figured out, and we've already been doing it for a decade. But what you said when you said that smart agents are probably already using this, that like set off fireworks in my head because that is not something that I had thought of that might be happening. Do you have any insight or examples that you can think of off the top of your head to
Yeah,
share?
Scott, if you'll go to I skipped over the slide, maybe I shouldn't have. Scott, there was this slide in there. It's got some red in it. You'll go back to it while I'm explaining it here. It was a Salesforce example. Um, it was this is just anecdotal, but it's data from Expedient, who's a partner of ours, who has an AI governance tool. One more. So this is a really interesting thing. So this was inside of Salesforce. Okay. 14,000 workers across 14 countries, despite the promise, offers workers. There's a lack of a clearly defined policy. But think about this: 55 have used unapproved Gen AI tools at work. 49% of users have used banned tools at work.
Wow.
Now, again, one company, one example, of their customers, right? But I just think really interesting, and I'm sure, like this is as we come down off of that peak of inflated expectations and sort of down into the trough, like now the antithetical research starts to come out. You know what I mean? So like, there's going to be more of these data points forthcoming. But I think the key, Scott, click to the next slide for me real quick. There was some interesting ones on there. 75% of organizations worldwide are currently implementing or considering bans on public generative AI. 61% thinking about that on a long-term or permanent basis. Now, that doesn't mean that they would not allow you to use it in a work fashion if access to it wasn't provided from the office and gated and what have you. But I think this is one why you can bring that down now, Scott. Um, this is, I think, one why the governance strategy is really important, Kate. Like when we think about the traditional metrics that we have in a contact center, right? It's like, what's your handle time? How many calls did you take right now? How many widgets did you process today? Like if you're, a young worker and you're trying to get ahead and these tools are, way more normal to you than they are to us, you're like, wow, I can chop more wood with my personal iPad next to me by jamming away and asking some questions so I can move faster. Well, that's great, but what are you putting into those models? And without an explicit, I mean, you can't be held liable for the activities of your individual employees if there's a policy and they've been trained. Right. And that's why I'm like on this governance road with everybody. I'm like, at least it's the same thing as your cybersecurity protections. Like we mentioned the credit card example earlier. You know, if you have a bad actor inside your business, you're not going to be held liable for that if you trained them and you had the security measures in place. But if you don't do that around Gen AI, that's the real risk is like you do everything inside the business, but an individual worker is like, if I'm being evaluated on how many things I can get done over the course of the day, I'm going to use the third party LLM to do more.
Well, there's a reason why agents can't have cell phones at their cubicle. It's
Yeah.
just the idea. You have no idea what they're going to
What they're doing.
And it's more complex than that, obviously. So
sure. No question. Any others?
Yeah, Kirby, I see your hand up.
Yes, you were speaking earlier about the difficulty in applying AI learning to just going through call scripts, and I get that. But I was also thinking about with chatbots, you've got actual the real log that happened, and I know from my personal experience as a consumer, interacting with
Yeah.
chat sessions and when a bot is being utilized and sometimes I sit there and I'm like, God, if anybody just read this script or they had anything automated monitoring it, it would be so obvious that it is failing horribly. So I was curious if you've had experiences run across where you're able to apply it to that scenario and provide recommendations for corrective action, cleanup, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it depends on where it's failing, Kirby. You know, I, I'm with you. There's a million calls that I've been on where I've repeated myself 10 times. And I don't, I'm from the Northeast. I'm from Philadelphia. You can probably hear my accent, but I don't think it's so thick that a bot tool shouldn't be able to pick me up saying yes, right? Like at the end of the day. Now, some of that is if you think about the fact that most of our technology, more and more of our technology is purchased you know, it, uh, in MRR, as service as opposed to buying it up front. And most of these are in 2 and 3 year terms. And you look at that chart that I had earlier that showed like the increase in generative AI capability just over the course of the last couple of years. I think I can say with a level of surety that most of those like the language kind of challenge problems that you have had sort of in using bots over the phone, a lot of that has been addressed with the chaining of multiple machines and deep learning. Right. Like, so historically, on a single machine, if you think about it, it's got one context of language to inform what it's doing and it's comparing you to it. But if you've got an AI that's going, here's the language around my IVR, my path, here's an English model, here's a different dialect model, here's a model. So like I think the natural language processing modeling has improved dramatically over the last couple of years. Now, if the fail is in being able to get to a real answer, that's generally an issue of the data that you're informing it with, right? Like sometimes people will just keep it super thin and go like, I'm going to try to replace my IVR. It only had 6 choices. Let me tell the AI those 6 choices. Well, it's not a whole hell of a lot better than pressing 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So you want to give it, a good data set. So I think, that was probably a longer answer than you were looking for. But if you have that, failure where you're repeating yourself, I would say a newer purchase piece of technology would probably not have the same recognition problems as one that's a 3 or 4 year old generation of that technology. But I think the challenges that we run into today is striking that balance of informing the bot with not enough data and informing it with too much, right? If you don't inform it with enough, it's never going to get you to an answer. If you inform it with too much, it's going to make decisions that maybe it shouldn't be making. So we do run into that a lot, and this is a common one that we go into. Customers will just say, "I tried it, it didn't work, but I'm being asked to improve on it." A very common scenario that can be addressed by just looking at those scripts and understanding the technology that you're using.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
So Brian, I know, is actually leading a discussion tomorrow with our magnet members about like AI. And Brian, I don't know if you'd like to speak a little bit about like the positives that you've seen. I know you were like your contact center implements and it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, and this was a great conversation here and learning about uses of impractical use within business. I'm going to talk tomorrow just about what we saw from a user. I'm an operator. I'm not a technical guy. So how did my challenges? What I saw was staffing, why I couldn't answer calls. How did we resolve those issues with adding a conversational voice assistant up front to be able to handle a bunch of simple calls, and it's been a huge success for us. And like I said, I'll share tomorrow more about how that happened. But I'm very excited about the technology and appreciate the conversation here today.
Sure. Brian, quick question for you. Maybe just, and it'll be potentially helpful for everybody else. You said I forget the exact words you used, but effectively implied that, you were leveraging conversational chatbots to handle sort of very basic work today, right? You're not using it to try to get to heavy duty analytics. You've got it on sort of the repetitive short call task kind of things.
Well, that's the way we started. Yeah, we started out initially. I had a significant number of calls who were coming in. I was, after COVID, couldn't hire. I was, 40 to 50% abandonment rate. And a lot of these calls were PBX calls from a hotel. Hey, can you transfer me to the restaurant? Transfer to housekeeping. Did you, what time is check-in? So a lot of those types of calls. So we implemented initially a virtual assistant that handled over 80% of those calls on day one, and just dropped my abandonment rate to under 10% and just provided a much better experience. And then, but from that, we said, hey, well, what else can we do with this? So we build it. It's doing more complex things now. It makes about 2,500 to 3,000 reservations a month for me without the need to speak to an agent. Takes credit card securely, looks at offers, looks at so yeah, it's done a lot of great stuff for us. So.
Amazing. Yeah, good. Would love to hear more about that. That's fantastic. Maggie, do I have time for just a 4-bullet wrap up on just some advice?
Yeah, of course.
Scott, will you go to I think it's like the second to last slide. It's one that has there's a couple of circles in there. It's the one before that. Before this one, just one before it. I wanted to make a point here. I just think at a high level, gang, if we're just a couple things on the left-hand side, experts estimate that 85% of AI will fail to drive business value, and that's not an AI problem, right? So just a couple pieces of advice that we'll close with, that we sort of some of the nuggets we've seen from doing a bunch of these. One, it's not a magic bullet. Think about it as a tool for speeding up data-driven decision making, and that's one. Two, it's really about the data. Garbage in, garbage out still applies. And it's probably even more relevant, right? Accurate data is your most important building block to inform AI. I think the third is, use a use case-based approach and learn from peers and early adopters. I think environments like the one we're in right now is the way to ensure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. Start small. Brian, your example is emblematic of number 4, right? Like start small to gain experience, lay a solid foundation. You were successful, Brian, because things like, a list of phone numbers and locations to call. Hey, connect me to whomever. You know what I mean? It's a pretty simple thing, right? Start small and then build up as you garner trust and you inform your model. And I think what's really important is like give it a purpose, right? Like Brian, you had a purpose there. You had an abandonment rate you were chasing. Like if you go in with just the idea of I got to go get some because the board is telling me, you'll never know what success looks like, right? At the end of the day, the last one is you don't have to go it alone. Click me forward, Scott. If we can help you in any way, we're happy to do that, from consulting to guided implementations of these things. We're around to help you do that. So that's it. If you found this informative, we would love to, to be around to give you a hand if we can do it in any way. And, that's it. I appreciate everybody's time. Maggie, I don't know if you do anything else from a wrap-up perspective, but
yes. Thank you so much, Scott. This was incredibly informative, and I feel like I have like a better understanding of AI, and also I feel like from everybody's perspective, I'm very excited to see how this gets implemented in the future. So yeah, I'm just going to throw up a slide. Thank you everybody for joining. I will post the recording in the Slack channel. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to me.